Hill Country Oasis private resort-style pool host up to 40 guests, $40 a head. Superhost Brenda W. That was the rental listing my neighbor found online. The photos were my limestone, my live oaks, and the pool my late wife designed with her own hands the last summer she was alive. The HOA president had been renting out my backyard for cash every weekend while I was 400 miles away helping my daughter with a new baby. She'd voted my grief into a community amenity, propped my gate open, and turned my wife's memorial into a party venue with a gold badge. She thought a widower wouldn't fight back. What she didn't know was that I spent 31 years as a real estate attorney, and the amendment she wrote to steal my pool applied to every pool in the neighborhood, including the showpiece behind her own house. So I didn't sue her. I read her own rule book back to her. Tell me below, would you have called a lawyer or become one? Let me take you back to the beginning, to the pool and the woman who built it. I need you to understand something about that pool before I tell you what I did to her. Eleanor designed every inch of it. She wasn't an engineer or an architect. She was a third-grade teacher who loved water the way some people love music, and when the cancer gave us one good summer left, she spent it sketching a free-form pool with a shallow sun ledge and a border of Texas limestone she picked, one slab at a time. She laid the first course of tile herself, kneeling on a foam pad with her sleeves rolled up, 2 months before the hospice bed came. The live oaks around it were saplings she planted our first spring in Stonebridge Ridge. She used to say, "A yard was just a promise you made to the future." I buried her on a Tuesday, and I kept that promise every morning with a skimmer and a cup of coffee. So you'll forgive me for what came next. Stonebridge Ridge sits in the hills north of San Antonio, where the limestone breaks through the grass like old bone, and the cedar smells sharp after rain. It's a gated subdivision, carved out of what used to be the Vosburg hog farm 40 years back. Nice homes, big lots, and a homeowners association run for the last 9 years by Brenda Whitmore. You've met a Brenda. White Cadillac Escalade, linen blazer over yoga pants, sunglasses she never takes off indoors. Her husband Gerald sits on the county planning commission, and between the two of them, they'd convinced half the neighborhood that her word and the law were the same thing. I'd been gone 3 weeks up in Austin, helping my daughter with a new baby. I came home on a Friday to find my side gate unlatched and my driveway stamped with tire tracks that weren't mine. The backyard told the rest. Cigarette butts crushed into Eleanor's tile. A scorch mark on the limestone where somebody had set a grill straight on the stone. The water was green and skimmed with sunscreen, and the whole place smelled like stale beer baking in the heat. My neighbor, a retired pipe fitter named Dale Hutchins, leaned over the fence with his coffee. He's got hands like catcher's mitts and a way of saying hard things soft. "They've been at it every Saturday, Walt," he said. "Loud till 2 in the morning. I called the non-emergency line twice. Nothing." "At what?" I asked. "Parties. Brenda's been throwing parties in your pool." He scratched the back of his neck, embarrassed for me. "Last weekend, there was a fella in an inflatable swan. I about came over and ran him off myself, but it ain't my property, and you know how she is about folks who step on her toes." I did know how she was. Everybody in Stonebridge Ridge knew how Brenda was. That was the whole problem. I thought he was confused. Then Brenda's Escalade rolled up to my curb, and she climbed out with a laminated folder like she'd been waiting for this. She didn't say sorry. She didn't say welcome home. She handed me a sheet of paper, tapped it with one French manicured nail, and told me the board had designated my pool a shared community amenity under Amendment 14. Effective immediately, for the good of the neighborhood. "Eleanor would have wanted it shared," she said. I looked at the scorch mark on my wife's stonework, and I felt something in me go very quiet and very clear. The kind of quiet I used to feel right before a deposition. I didn't argue. I just said, "Can I keep this copy?" She smiled. "Keep it. Frame it if you want." I did eventually, but not the way she meant. I stood in my own driveway and watched her Escalade pull away, and I thought about the difference between authority and the appearance of it. Brenda had spent 9 years collecting the appearance, the title, the folder, the nail, tapping the page. She'd never once had to test whether the real thing was underneath. People like her never expect to meet someone who knows where the line is drawn, who's read the statute, who isn't impressed by laminate. That was my whole edge, and she just handed me 3 weeks to use it. The next Saturday I stayed home. By 7 that evening the cars started rolling in, lifted trucks and a party bus with tinted windows, parking across 3 lawns like they owned the block. Brenda's son Tyler led them through my side gate, the one with the latch his mother had apparently been propping open for a month. They came with coolers and a Bluetooth tower speaker the size of a water heater. By 8, the bass was rattling the windows in my kitchen, and a man I'd never met was doing belly flops off Eleanor's sun ledge, while a dozen people I'd never met cheered. I walked out in my work boots with my hands in my pockets, calm. I'd learned a long time ago that the man who keeps his voice down usually keeps the high ground. A girl in a bikini was using Eleanor's limestone ledge as a beer pong table. Everybody had hung string lights from the live oak my wife planted the spring our daughter was born. The branches sagged under the weight, and a low part of me wanted to climb up and cut every cord. I didn't. I breathed in the mesquite smoke and counted to 10 the way Eleanor taught me when the world got loud. "Evening," I said. "This is private property. I'd like everyone out." Tyler looked me up and down like I was the help. "Talk to my mom, old-timer. It's a community pool." Right on cue, Brenda appeared at the gate with a stack of red plastic cups and the energy of a woman who'd never once been told no. She put herself between me and the crowd. "Walter, we're not doing this again. The amenity is approved. You're interfering with a community function, and that is a finable offense under our covenants. Don't make me write you up at your own party." My party. The smell of lighter fluid and mesquite smoke rolled off a grill somebody had dragged onto the patio, and under it, I caught the chlorine and sunscreen reek of a pool nobody was bothering to clean. The bass thumped in my chest like a second heartbeat. Across the fence, Dale watched with his arms crossed, shaking his head slow. Here's the thing about getting older. People mistake your stillness for weakness. They see gray hair, and they assume the fight's gone out of you. Brenda looked at me and saw a tired widower who'd caved to avoid a scene. What she didn't see was 31 years of contract law sitting behind my eyes, quietly taking notes. I spent those years in conference rooms watching people exactly like Brenda, people who confused volume with leverage, who thought the loud part was the strong part. The ones who shouted were almost always the ones with the weakest paper. The strong ones sat quiet and let the documents do the talking, because documents don't get tired, and documents don't lose their temper. Eleanor used to tease me that I argued like I was filling out a form. She meant it kindly. It was the nicest thing anybody ever said about how I work. So I looked at the chrome pole bolted into her stonework, and the strangers in her water, and I did the only thing that has ever actually won anything. I started filling out the form in my head. "All right," I said. "I won't make a scene." Her shoulders dropped an inch. She thought she'd won. That night, after the last truck rumbled out at 1:45, I went into the garage and pulled down 2 weatherproof security cameras I'd bought years ago and never installed. I mounted one under the eave facing the pool, and one over the side gate, angled to catch every face and every license plate. Then I sat down at Eleanor's old kitchen table and typed a single polite letter. A formal written request under Texas Property Code Chapter 209 for every record the association had, every meeting minute, every vote, every dollar collected, and the full recorded text of Amendment 14. In Texas, an HOA has to hand those records over. It's the law. Most people never ask, so most boards never expected. A board that's been cutting corners for 9 years tends to get sloppy because nobody ever checks the math. I'd built my whole career on the corners other people cut. Then I did one more thing. I walked the property line in the dark with a flashlight and a tape measure, and I photographed every cracked tile, every cigarette burn, the scorch mark on the limestone, and the spot where a beer bottle had chipped the edge of the sun ledge Eleanor laid by hand. Damage has a dollar value. Dollar values have a way of becoming exhibits. I sealed the envelope, set it by my keys, and went to bed, listening to the crickets reclaim my yard. For the first time in 3 weeks, I slept fine. Brenda thought silence meant surrender. It meant I'd started building the file. A smart person caught using a dead woman's pool for keggers might have eased off. Brenda doubled down. 2 weeks later, Dale called me over to his computer. He'd found my backyard on a party rental app, the kind where you book somebody's pool by the hour. There it was, my limestone, my oaks, Eleanor's water under a filter that made it look turquoise. The listing called it Hill Country Oasis Private Resort Style Pool, host up to 40 guests. $40 a head. Hosted by Brenda W. She had 19 reviews and a little gold badge that said Superhost. She wasn't just trespassing anymore. She was running a business out of my grief in cash and pocketing every dime. So I built a fence. Nothing fancy. 6-foot cedar across the side yard sunk in concrete with a locked gate. I did it. Legal. Set back from the property line. The same kind half the neighborhood already had. It took me a weekend, and a sunburn across the back of my neck. The boards smelled like fresh-cut pine, and for one evening, the yard felt like ours again. The citation showed up Monday, taped to my front door. $500 a day. The violation, if you can believe it, was obstruction of a designated community amenity. Brenda had written it herself. There was a second letter underneath, on HOA letterhead, warning that continued obstruction could result in a lien against my home and eventually foreclosure. Let me tell you what most folks don't know. An HOA in Texas can, under the wrong circumstances, put a lien on your house over unpaid fines and assessments. It's a real power, and boards like Brenda's use it like a cattle prod. They count on you being scared of the word foreclosure. They count on you paying up and shutting up. I'd represented people on both sides of that fight for 3 decades. I wasn't scared of the word. I was insulted by it. I filed a formal dispute with the board, in writing, certified mail, return receipt requested. I requested a hearing, which, under our own bylaws, they were required to grant. I showed up to that hearing with a folder of my own photographs, the rental listing, a damage estimate from a tile contractor, and a copy of my recorded deed showing the pool sat entirely on my lot. The hearing lasted 4 minutes. Brenda chaired it herself, which should tell you everything. She didn't look at my folder. Her 2 board allies, a nervous accountant named Phil and a woman named Carol who never once made eye contact, voted exactly how Brenda's chin tilted. Dispute denied, fine upheld, next item on the agenda. You're welcome to appeal, Brenda said, already stacking her papers. To the board. The same board. She actually smiled when she said it. I drove to the county clerk's office that same afternoon. I'd known Ruth Avery for 20 years, back when I used to pull plats and title histories for clients. She's the kind of public servant who remembers every deed in 3 counties and takes personal offense at sloppy paperwork. I asked her to pull the recorded dedication for the Stonebridge Ridge Common Amenities, the document that would legally turn private property into shared community space. Ruth typed. Ruth frowned. Ruth typed again. Walt, she said, slowly sliding her glasses up. I've got the original common area dedication from 1984. Clubhouse, the front green, the 2 entrance monuments. That's it. She tapped the screen. There's no recorded amendment adding any pool. Not yours, not anybody's. If your board says they dedicated a private pool as common area, somebody needs to show me where it's recorded, because it isn't here. The fluorescent light hummed. Outside, the afternoon heat pressed against the glass. A dedication that isn't recorded, I knew, isn't a dedication at all. It's a wish on letterhead. You cannot vote yourself ownership of another man's backyard. No board can. No covenant can. It has to be deeded and recorded, and it never, ever was. I thanked Ruth, walked back to my truck, and sat in the parking lot for a minute with my hands on the wheel. Brenda had built her whole operation on a document that didn't exist, and I was about to find the one that did. Before I tell you what I found, I have to tell you how low she was willing to go. Word got around that I'd been to the county clerk. In a neighborhood like ours, nothing travels faster than the news that somebody's pushing back. Brenda must have felt the ground shift under her heels because instead of retreating, she got cruel. She caught me at the mailbox on a Thursday evening, the sky going copper behind the hills, a red-tailed hawk riding the heat up over the cedar. She didn't bring paperwork this time. She brought a knife. "You know," she said, leaning on my mailbox like we were old friends, "I knew Eleanor, a little. Sweet woman, quiet." She let that sit. "She'd be embarrassed, Walter. All this fuss over some tile and water. She gave to this community. She'd have wanted us to enjoy it. Instead, her husband's out here playing lawyer and making everybody miserable." I have been called a lot of things in a lot of courtrooms. I've kept my composure through insults that would curl your hair. But something about Eleanor's name in that woman's mouth, using my wife as a weapon against me, put a cold, still anger in me that I hadn't felt since the day of the diagnosis. I didn't take the bait. I said, "Have a good evening, Brenda," and I walked inside before my face could betray me. An hour later, Gerald came by. He didn't knock so much as fill the doorway. Big man, golf shirt, the soft confidence of a fellow who'd never once been told no by anybody who mattered. He didn't threaten me exactly. Men like Gerald never do it where a recorder would catch it. He just leaned in and reminded me, friendly as you please, that he sat on the county planning commission, that he knew the permit office, the inspectors, the folks who decide whose projects sail through and whose sit in a drawer for 18 months. That a man my age, alone in a big house, ought to think hard about how much trouble he really wanted. "We're reasonable people, Walt," he said. "Pay the fine, take down the fence, let the neighborhood have its fun. Everybody moves on." Then he patted my door frame like he owned it and walked back into the dark, his loafers crunching on the gravel. That night I couldn't sleep. I went out back and sat on the edge of the sun ledge with my feet in the water Eleanor wanted there. The pool was clean again. I drained and scrubbed it myself, every tile on my knees, the way she'd laid them. The limestone still held the day's heat. Crickets sawed in the oaks. Somewhere, a long way off, a pack of coyotes started up and quit. I put my hand flat on the tile she'd set with her own fingers. The one slightly crooked piece near the steps she'd refused to let the contractor fix because perfect things have no soul. The grout was rough where she'd smoothed it with her thumb. I could still see the shape of that summer if I closed my eyes. Eleanor, in a straw hat, sunburned and laughing. Mortar drying on her knuckles, telling me a yard was just a promise you made to the future. And I made her a promise, out loud, feeling like a fool and not caring. "They're not taking your pool," I said. "Not the water, not the stone, not your name. None of it." Then I went inside, made a pot of coffee at midnight, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the recorded plat of Stonebridge Ridge, the original 1984 subdivision map, filed when they carved these lots out of the old Vosburg hog farm. And I pulled up the full text of Amendment 14, the document Brenda had waved in my face like a badge. I'd skimmed it before. Now, I read it the way I used to read a contract the night before trial. Slow, mean, and looking for the seam where it would tear. Around 2 in the morning I found the seam. I read it 3 times to be sure. Then I sat back in Eleanor's chair, and for the first time in weeks I laughed out loud in my empty kitchen. Brenda hadn't just made a mistake, she'd handed me the keys. Here's what 9 years of unchecked power does to a person. It makes them lazy. Brenda hadn't written Amendment 14 to be careful. She'd written it to be greedy. The amendment didn't say, "Walter Hayes's pool is now common property." She couldn't write that even she knew it would look like the theft it was. So she'd done something cleverer and dumber. She'd written it general. Amendment 14 declared that any private recreational water feature within the community may be designated by the board as a shared community amenity, available for board-approved community functions upon application by any member in good standing. Any private water feature, any member in good standing, any board-approved community function. She wrote it broad so she could grab my pool without naming it. But broad cuts both ways. She'd built a rule that applied to every pool in Stonebridge Ridge, including the showpiece infinity pool behind her own house on the hill. I read it again, slower. The language was airtight in the worst way for her. It didn't say the board could pick and choose. It said any member in good standing could apply to host a board-approved community function at any private water feature in the neighborhood. My dues were paid. I was a member in good standing. And nothing in those bylaws gave the board the right to deny an application that met every written requirement. Brenda had stripped out the board's discretion to make it easier to steamroll people. She'd never imagined the steamroller could turn around. But that wasn't even the best part. I went back to the 1984 plat, the original subdivision map, and I read the deed restrictions filed with it. When the developers carved Stonebridge Ridge out of the Vossberg hog farm, they hadn't extinguished the land's agricultural history. They couldn't, not entirely. There was a recorded agricultural use easement running across the back third of the subdivision, a holdover that specifically preserved the right to hold agricultural exhibitions, livestock events, and gatherings of agricultural associations on the affected parcels. I pulled the easement boundary and laid it over the modern lot map. The easement ran right under Brenda Whitmore's backyard. I sat there in the dark and felt the whole thing click together like a lock. Her own amendment gave any member the right to apply to host a community function at any pool in the neighborhood. The old easement on her land protected agricultural gatherings, and I happened to know personally about 300 hog farmers who'd been looking for a place to hold their annual heritage convention. You play stupid games, Eleanor used to say. You win stupid prizes. And here's the legal bones of it, plain as I can make it, because I want you to be able to do this too if it ever comes to you. A homeowners association can only do what its recorded documents allow, and it has to follow its own rules exactly. It can't bend them for the powerful and enforce them on the weak. If a board writes a rule broad enough to grab one neighbor's property, that same rule by law applies to every property it describes, including the people who wrote it. Boards forget that. They write rules like weapons and never imagine the weapon getting picked up off the floor. I closed the laptop. The coffee had gone cold. Out the window, the first gray light was coming up over the oaks she'd planted, and the crickets were finally giving it up for the night. I wasn't going to sue Brenda Whitmore. Suing her would take years and make her a martyr. I was going to use her own rules to throw the biggest hog convention Bexar County had ever seen in her backyard. And there wasn't a single thing in her precious covenants that could stop me. The next morning, I drove out to Dale Hutchins's brother's place, 40 minutes east, where the pavement turns to caliche and the air goes thick with the good, honest stink of livestock. Dale's brother Roy runs the Hill Country Hog and Heritage Association, 300 and some members' family farms, most of them the kind of people who've been raising Durocs and Berkshires on the same land for 4 generations. Every year they hold a convention, breed showcases, a barbecue cook-off, a swap meet, a greased pig contest for the kids, and a Saturday night band. Every year they scramble for a venue because nobody wants 300 farmers and 40 hogs on their property. I sat at Roy's kitchen table, drank coffee strong enough to strip paint, and made him an offer. I had a venue, big lots, a grand house, a beautiful pool, all of it perfectly legal under the neighborhood's own bylaws, free of charge. I just needed the association to file the application as the community function and to come in numbers. Roy laughed so hard he had to set his cup down. "Walt," he said, wiping his eyes, "you want us to hold the hog convention in some HOA queen's backyard?" "I want you to hold it at a board-approved community function," I said, "at a private water feature applied for by a member in good standing. Every word of that is straight out of their rule book." He stopped laughing. He looked at me the way a man looks at a fence he's deciding whether to lean on. "This about Eleanor's pool?" he asked. He'd known her too. Everybody had bought their tomatoes from her stand at the farmer's market. When I nodded, his jaw set. Then he stuck out his hand, and that hand was rough as bark and dry as August. 40 hogs, he said. You'll get 40 hogs and 300 of the orneriest farmers in 3 counties, and not one of them will leave till the band quits. You sure that's what you want in some rich lady's flower beds? I'm sure, I said. Then God help her, Roy said, and poured me more coffee. Here's how I built it, brick by legal brick. First, the application. Amendment 14 required a member in good standing to apply to designate a private water feature for a board-approved community function. So I applied, in writing, certified with a check for the filing fee taped to the form, so they couldn't claim I'd skipped a step. I named the Hill Country Hog and Heritage Association's annual convention as the function. I named the location, the private water feature at the Whitmore residence. Every box on Brenda's own form filled in her own language. Second, the board vote. This is where most people would have been stuck because Brenda controlled the board. But I had Patty Lawson. Patty was the one board member Brenda hadn't fully captured. A straight-shooting widow who joined to fix the drainage on her street and stayed because she didn't like what she saw. I showed Patty the unrecorded dedication, the rental listing, the cash Brenda had been pocketing. Patty went quiet. Then she went cold. Then she went to the bylaws. Under our own rules, any board member could call a special meeting and force a vote on a properly filed application. Quorum was 3. Patty could compel the meeting, and an application that met every written requirement couldn't simply be ignored. Refusing to process it would itself violate the covenants, the kind of violation that hands a member a clean lawsuit. Third, the permits. I went to the county. Agricultural event on a recorded agricultural easement with proper sanitation and parking plans. Gerald sat on the planning commission, sure, but permits like this didn't go through his office, and Ruth Avery walked my paperwork through herself, stamping each page with a little extra force. Fourth, and this is the part Eleanor would have loved, I called Megan Saunders at the local station. I didn't pitch her revenge. I pitched her a heartwarming community story, historic hog farmers, a vanishing way of life, a free convention bringing the county together, human interest. She bit. She had no idea what she was really walking into, and neither did Brenda. By the end of 2 weeks, I had an application on file, a board meeting forced, county permits in hand, 300 farmers RSVP'd, 40 registered hogs, a barbecue team, a band called the Caliche Ramblers, and a news crew booked for Saturday. I'd never raised my voice. I'd never broken a single rule. I'd just read theirs more carefully than they ever had. Brenda found out on a Tuesday. I know it was Tuesday because that's when the forced board meeting hit the official calendar, and Patty told me later that Brenda read the agenda item 3 times before the color drained out of her face. Application to designate the Whitmore private water feature as a community amenity for the annual Hog and Heritage Convention. Her name. Her pool, her own amendment quoted line by line. She called an emergency meeting that night to repeal Amendment 14. And this is the part I want you to sit with, because it's the sweetest trap of all, and she said it herself. Brenda's bylaws, the ones she'd written to protect her power, required 30 days written notice to all homeowners before the board could amend or repeal any covenant. 30 days. She'd put that rule in to stop other people from changing things behind her back. Now it stood between her and the only move that could save her. The convention was 19 days out. She could not repeal Amendment 14 in time, not without violating her own notice requirement, which would void the repeal and hand me a second lawsuit gift-wrapped. For the first time in 9 years, the machine she'd built was running over her instead of for her. Patty told me Brenda tried everything in that emergency meeting. She wanted an emergency exception to the notice rule. There wasn't one. She'd never written one because she'd never imagined needing to move fast against herself. She wanted to declare my application incomplete. Patty read the application aloud line by line against the form, and every box was checked in Brenda's own language. She wanted to vote it down outright. Patty reminded the board on the record that denying a conforming application would itself breach the covenants and that she'd be documenting any vote to do so. Phil, the accountant, suddenly remembered he had somewhere to be. The meeting adjourned with nothing accomplished, which was exactly the only thing the rules would allow. So, she did what people like Brenda always do when the rules stop working for them. She tried to change the story. By Thursday, there were flyers in every mailbox. "Protect our community," they read, over a photo of Brenda looking brave. The flyer said a disgruntled resident was waging a harassment campaign against a woman-led volunteer board, that he wanted to turn our beautiful neighborhood into a livestock yard, and that property values were under threat. My name wasn't on it, but everybody knew. At the grocery store, a few neighbors wouldn't meet my eye. I didn't fight the flyer. Fighting it would have made me the angry man she was describing. Instead, I let Dale and Patty do the quiet work. A word here, a coffee there. The truth passed porch to porch, the way it travels best in a small place. People started remembering the 2 a.m. parties, the strangers in their streets, the way Brenda fined anybody who crossed her. The story didn't hold. Then, she called code enforcement on me. A county inspector showed up on a Friday, polite and apologetic, holding a complaint that alleged I was operating an illegal commercial event venue. I walked him through it in 10 minutes. The event wasn't commercial, admission was free. It was an agricultural gathering on a recorded agricultural easement. With county permits I laid on the hood of his truck one by one. He read them, nodded, and actually grinned. "Sir," he said, folding the complaint back into his clipboard, "whoever filed this didn't do their homework. You're cleaner than most churches." He tipped his cap and drove off down the caliche, dust hanging gold in the afternoon light. Every weapon Brenda reached for turned to sand in her hand. The amendment was hers. The notice rule was hers. The easement was older than her marriage. The permits were ironclad. She'd spent 9 years believing the rules were whatever she said they were, and now the actual rules, the recorded, filed, enforceable ones, had her surrounded. That weekend I saw her standing at the edge of her own backyard, looking out over that flawless infinity pool, the water spilling silent over the vanishing edge toward the hills. She had a glass of wine in her hand, and an expression I almost recognized. The expression of someone doing the math for the first time in their life, and not liking the answer. She still had 19 days to find a way out. She was about to discover there wasn't one. Desperate people get inventive. I'll give Brenda that. With the repeal off the table and the permits airtight, she went looking for any thread to pull. First, she tried safety. She filed a complaint claiming the event posed a public health hazard. Livestock, she said, would contaminate the neighborhood. It might have worked on somebody who hadn't done their homework, but agricultural events have a whole body of regulation built around exactly this, and my permit already included a sanitation plan, portable washing stations, and a licensed waste hauler booked for Sunday morning. The county health office reviewed her complaint and closed it in a day. Then she hired private security. A 2-man outfit in a black SUV started parking at the entrance to her street, turning away anyone who looked like a farmer. That lasted until Patty reminded them in writing that the roads in Stonebridge Ridge were public right-of-way dedicated to the county back in 1984, and that blocking lawful access to a permitted event could land their company a lawsuit and their licenses in front of the state board. The black SUV didn't come back. I almost felt sorry for those 2 boys. They'd signed on to shoo away trespassers, and instead they'd been handed a fight against a recorded plat and 40 years of property law. You can hire muscle. You can't hire your way around a deed. That's the thing folks like Brenda never understand until it's far too late. Money buys you noise, but it doesn't buy you the paperwork. And in the end, the paperwork is the only thing that votes. Then she sent Gerald to the county to kill my permits directly. This was her biggest play, and it was where it all came apart for them. Because when Gerald leaned on the permit office, somebody at the county did what somebody at the county always eventually does. They pulled the file to cover themselves. And in the file, alongside my spotless paperwork, was the thing that finished the Whitmores for good. Patty found the rest. As a board member, she finally got full access to the association's bank records. Records Brenda had kept locked in a drawer for years. There it was, in black and white. 11 months of cash deposits that matched the dates of the pool rentals on that app. $40 a head. 40 heads a weekend. Weekend after weekend. None of it ever reported to the membership. None of it on a single official ledger. Brenda hadn't just stolen the use of my pool. She'd been embezzling the proceeds. Patty photographed every page. She made 3 copies. She gave one to me, kept one in her safe, and quietly, carefully set the third aside for the county. I want to be honest with you about how I felt holding those bank records. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired and a little sad. The way you feel when you finally understand exactly how small a person is. Brenda had desecrated my wife's pool for $40 a head. She'd waved Eleanor's name in my face to protect a cash skim. But I didn't make a single move with those records yet. Timing is everything. A good lawyer doesn't fire his best shot in a parking lot. He waits for the room to be full. And the room was about to be very, very full. There was one more thing I did that week, and I'll admit it wasn't strictly legal strategy. It was for me. I drove out to the print shop and had them make a sign, a nice wooden one, routed and painted, that read, Eleanor's Pool, the way the old farms out here put the family name on the gate. I hung it by the steps. Whatever happened Saturday, that pool was getting its name back. The week before the convention, my yard filled up with deliveries. Roy's people staged tents and a portable stage on a vacant lot near the entrance. Trailers came in loaded with show pens and feed. The Caliche Ramblers ran a sound check that drifted across the hills at dusk. Somewhere, a hog the size of a sofa, a champion Berkshire boar named Bojangles, was getting his coat brushed for the big day. The night before, I sat one last time on Eleanor's sun ledge, feet in the water, the limestone warm under my hands. The oaks she planted rustled overhead, full grown now, throwing shade I'd never see her stand in. Tomorrow, I told her, tomorrow they find out what kind of man you married. Then I went in and laid out my clothes for the morning, a clean shirt, and in the breast pocket folded small a single-framed page I'd had made at the print shop. Amendment 14, her words, ready to come home. Saturday came up hot and blue, not a cloud from one rim of hills to the other. They started arriving at 8. Dually trucks towing stock trailers rolled through the gates of Stonebridge Ridge in a slow diesel parade, and by 9 the subdivision smelled like nothing it had ever smelled like before. Mesquite smoke, barbecue livestock, and 300 farmers in clean pearl snap shirts. The Caliche Ramblers tuned up on the stage. A banner went up over Brenda's cul-de-sac, Hill Country Hog and Heritage Association, 41st Annual Convention. Welcome, y'all. I stood at the top of Brenda's driveway in my clean shirt and watched her infinity pool become the center of the most beautiful chaos I have ever seen. They'd set the greased pig contest in the shallow end. Somebody had rigged a ramp, and a slick, happy piglet went skidding into the water, while a dozen kids in swim trunks dove after it, shrieking with joy, sliding across the very edge where Brenda used to pose for her party listings. Bojangles, the champion Berkshire, held court on the lawn under a striped tent, getting his photo taken with toddlers. The cook-off teams had their smokers lined up along the drive. Blue haze curling over the hedges, Brenda trimmed with a level. Old men sat in folding chairs telling lies about hogs they'd raised in 1979. A 4-H girl, no older than 10, had set up a folding table by the pool and was selling raffle tickets for a freezer hog, her handwriting careful on the cardboard sign. 2 brothers in matching overalls walked a sow named Duchess past the koi pond, and Duchess decided the koi pond looked better than the koi did. The smell of it all rolled up the hill in waves, mesquite and brisket fat, fresh hay, hog and horse and sunscreen. The whole honest perfume of a way of life. Brenda had moved out here to look at from a distance and never actually touch. Now it was touching everything. It was in her hedges and on her pool deck and drifting through her open kitchen window. It was perfect. It was loud and joyful and stone-cold legal. Brenda came out of her house at 9:15. I wish I could describe her face. She stood on her own porch in white linen, looking down at 300 farmers and 40 hogs and a piglet doing laps in her infinity pool, and she made a sound I'd never heard a grown woman make. Then she started screaming. "This is private property. Get off my... This is my house. Somebody call the police. Call the police! So I did her one better. I'd already invited them. Sheriff's Deputy Coleman had been there since 8, parked right out front because I'd given the department a courtesy heads-up weeks ago. Permits, easement, the works. When Brenda came charging down her own lawn, demanding arrests, Coleman met her halfway, calm as a Sunday, with a folder of my paperwork already in his hand. "Ma'am," he said, loud enough for the crowd and the news camera to catch, "I've reviewed it. This is a permitted agricultural event on a recorded agricultural easement approved as a community function under your Homeowners Association's own Amendment 14. Application filed by a member in good standing. It's all in order. There's nothing here to enforce. Nothing illegal is happening." "It's my pool." "Yes, ma'am," Coleman said. "And under the rule your board passed, any member can apply to use any private water feature for a community function. Somebody did. You might take that up with whoever wrote the rule." That's when Megan Saunders' camera swung to me and Brenda's eyes followed it, and the whole thing finally landed on her like a dropped piano. I walked down the lawn nice and slow. I didn't gloat. I just took the framed page out of my breast pocket and held it out to her in both hands, the way you'd hand someone a diploma. "You told me to frame it," I said. So I did. It was Amendment 14, her words matted and glassed, catching the morning sun. "You wrote a rule to take my wife's pool," I said, quiet, just for her, though the camera caught every word. "You made it apply to every pool in the neighborhood, so nobody could say you singled me out. I just held you to it, same way you held all of us." Her hands didn't come up to take the frame. They were shaking too hard. And then Patty Lawson stepped up beside me, holding a different folder, and her voice carried clear across the lawn. "Brenda," she said, "the board's calling a special meeting Monday. We pulled the association's bank records." She let that hang in the hot air. "We're going to want you to explain 11 months of cash deposits, the ones that match the pool rentals, the ones that never made it onto a single ledger." 300 farmers had gone quiet. The piglet splashed, somewhere a hog grunted, and Brenda Whitmore stood in the middle of her own perfect lawn and understood at last that it was over. She turned to Gerald for help. Gerald was looking at his shoes. She turned to the neighbors, the ones who'd nodded along at 9 years of her meetings, and found them watching her, the way you watch a storm finally break over somebody else's house. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody ever does. Once the spell comes off, that's the secret about people like Brenda. Their power was never really theirs. It was on loan from everyone too tired or too scared to say no. And the second somebody proved it could be done, the loan got called in. All at once. The Caliche Ramblers, bless them, picked that exact moment to kick into a two-step. The special meeting Monday lasted a lot longer than 4 minutes. Patty laid the bank records out for the whole membership. 11 months of unreported cash. A private pool rented for profit. Fines levied to cover the theft. The county had its copy by then, too. Brenda didn't shout. There was nothing left to shout with. She resigned as president before they could finish the motion to remove her. And a few weeks later, she signed a settlement agreeing to repay every dollar she'd skimmed, plus the damage to my tile, plus my legal costs, rather than face the embezzlement charges the county was sharpening. Gerald quietly did not stand for re-election to anything. Their for sale sign went up before the first cold front. The neighborhood voted Patty Lawson in as president. First thing she did was open the books to every member, every month. Second thing she did was repeal Amendment 14, with full 30 days notice, done right so no one could ever again vote themselves the keys to a neighbor's backyard. I helped her write the new bylaws. We made them short and fair and impossible to weaponize. It's the last legal work I expect to do, and the best. I drained and refinished Eleanor's pool one more time that fall, replaced the cracked tiles, kept the crooked one by the steps, replanted the bed where her water lilies used to float. The live oaks she planted are tall enough now to shade the whole deck by afternoon, and on quiet evenings, I still take my coffee out there and sit on the warm limestone and tell her how the kids are doing. But here's the part I think she'd have liked best. The hog convention made money, a lot of it. vendor fees, the cook-off, donations that poured in once Megan's story aired, and half of Texas fell in love with 300 farmers and a piglet in an HOA pool. We didn't keep it. We started something with it. The Eleanor Hayes Agricultural Heritage Fund pays a scholarship every year to a kid from a hill country farm family who wants to study agriculture or law, and it keeps a small legal aid fund for homeowners getting steamrolled by some board that thinks the rules are whatever they say they are. Last year, it helped a widow 2 counties over keep her house. Eleanor would have cried. Then she'd have made cookies for the whole fund. Megan's story ran on a Thursday and went the way these things go now, picked up by the city stations, then a national morning show, then the whole internet. Texas widower throws hog convention in HOA president's yard. The piglet in the infinity pool became a kind of folk hero. For about 2 weeks, I couldn't buy my own groceries without somebody shaking my hand. I'm a private man, and I'll confess I didn't love the attention. But I made my peace with it because every time the story spread, another bullied homeowner somewhere wrote in to say they'd finally pulled their HOA's records and found the same kind of rot. People ask me if I feel bad about it, about the hogs on her lawn, the cameras, the whole spectacle. I don't. I never raised my voice. I never broke a rule. I never touched a thing that wasn't mine. All I did was read the fine print of the very document a bully wrote to crush me and hand it back to her exactly as written. Power that isn't checked always gets careless, and careless always eventually signs its own paperwork. So here's what I'll leave you with. Read the rules, all of them. The boring ones, the fine print, the stuff nobody else bothers with. Keep your receipts, keep your records, keep your cool. The loudest person in the room is almost never the one holding the winning hand. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had an HOA or a neighbor try to bully you off your own property? What did you do?